from creation to publication. Here is where you can find inspiration, ideas, and meet the people behind the stories. We bring life to books. That's how I like to think about it. Now, you can find me on Facebook and YouTube. If there are some shows you'd like to catch that you haven't seen, just check out Catherine Taylor TV. Now, hold fast for today's interview, and that's a hint, by the way. Today, my guest is well known to most people. He is the author of more than 20 books for both young people and adults. He has won numerous awards in Canada, too many for me to list, but they are going to be in his biography below. And his work has also been translated into many languages. So how cool is that? Well, I want you to meet my guest. I'm going to bring him on screen. Meet Kevin Major. Hi, Kevin.
Hey, good to be here.
Oh, it's wonderful to have you here. I love featuring writers from Newfoundland. And just in case people don't realize that, we are here in Newfoundland. I'm in central Newfoundland in Grand Falls, Windsor. And Kevin, you are
in St. John's. We're bright and sunny today. Cold, but bright and sunny.
Very much like here, and we take a bad rap for our weather. I think people think the sun doesn't shine here at all, but it does.
Yeah, absolutely.
And Kevin, it shines most in our hearts. We're wonderful people.
I vouch for that.
I would think so with all your writing. You have been in the business of being a writer for so many years. And I don't mean that in a bad way, but I don't want to start this on the wrong note. No.
Right.
But how did it feel, when you started out with nothing, really? Your first
Well, there are a number of years, and I don't like to count them up either necessarily. But I started out in university actually intending to become a doctor, and a little bit far away from the idea of being a writer. But I grew up in the west coast of Newfoundland. I never encountered writers. Such a channel such as this never existed, for example. So I really didn't know what it took to be a writer, although I had an interest in writing, and of course I love to read. I spent 3 years at university doing pre-med. I was accepted for medical school, but in the back of my mind was the idea, at least I'd like to try to write and see if I could get it to work, see if I could get a book published, basically. So I took a year away from university, I did some traveling, came back and switched faculties, dropped the idea of going to med school, and became a teacher. And in my spare time, I started to write seriously. The first effort didn't get anywhere. Some encouraging comments, but nobody really wanted to publish it. But the second time around, I wrote the book that you're referring to today, Hold Fast, and it was published in 1978. So it's, if I hadn't been able to get published, obviously I would have gone on to do something else. But it was encouragement. I wasn't making a great deal of money from it, certainly not enough to quit my job. So I continued to substitute teach for a while, wrote some other books, and eventually gave up that extra job. And for the last 30 years or so, I've been able to make a living as a writer, with the great support of my wife, who had a permanent job, I might say.
It does help, doesn't it? I bet your parents cried when you told them you were switching out of medicine and you were going to be a writer. Oh, my. But, it can be a challenging profession because a lot of people think, oh, you write a book, it's going to be a bestseller, it'll be a movie, going to have it made. I mean, the reality is not that. The reality is...
No. The reality is not that, generally. I mean, you do hear the exceptions, and you hear of the Stephen Kings of the world, which you would, you'd like to sell in those numbers, but the vast majority of writers don't. And it's only, in my case, with the buildup of a number of books that over a period of time, and, things like grants from the Canada Council or whatever, that, and a couple of movie deals that ended up bringing in some money, that I was able to make a living from it. So it's a struggle, but it's, in my case, it was something I really wanted to do. I didn't really want to go through life wondering what would have happened if I said, I'll give it a try, and if it works, it works. If it doesn't, at least I will know.
Mm-hmm. And I think I've often said to my kids, follow what is your passion. Don't follow
Mhm.
what you think your mother thinks you should do. You're going to have to do
Right.
what you want to do. And I think that's where we can express ourselves, and perhaps why you have 20 books and you've had so much success. You've had awards, and
Mhm.
I go back to Hold Fast, which was the movie, and now they say Hold Fast Newfoundland and Labrador through COVID. Like that phrase, I'm almost thinking when I think of you that must have been your motto through life. Hold fast.
Well, yeah, because the writing has ups and downs. I mean, first of all, you got to contend with reviews, and reviews are not always positive. You tend to focus on the positive ones, but even a book like Holdfast got a review in the Globe and Mail that I particularly didn't particularly enjoy. But as opposed to that, then it went on to win some awards. So you take the good with the bad, and you strive through, and you retain, I think, most of all, a belief in yourself as a writer, and you go to it knowing not everybody's going to enjoy everything you write. People have specific interests in the books that they take time to read, and mine may well not appeal to them. That's fine. I can deal with that. No writer thinks that he's going to write the book that everybody wants to read. So you build and you make a life for yourself as a writer, and you get into a routine, I guess, and you make every book, in my case, a little bit new and different, and there's a challenge with each of them. And because I write or have written books for a variety of age groups, from young children all the way to adults, each book has its approach and its challenges and its audience too.
Well, I wanted to ask you about that because there are so many different books, and I've read. I haven't read all of your books, but I've read quite a few, and I'm definitely going to read more. But what I found was that, for example, when I was reading this one here, New Under the Sun. There we
Mm-hmm.
go.
Right.
That was so much history, and then I got reading your newer books, and there's so much variety in what you wrote. Like, was that on purpose, or was that where your interest was at the time?
Mm-hmm. I like the challenge of, I honestly say, I like the challenge of trying something different with each book. Now, I had to qualify that because I've written started a series of books of murder mysteries, and I had never, up to this point, up to this past year, written a sequel to any of the books that I've written. I've been asked to, but I never have. And so, I approach each book as something that I want to do at a particular point in time. I was writing historical novels for a number of years because I had written a nonfiction history of Newfoundland and Labrador. And I thought, oh, yeah, there's stories that really need to be fleshed out and made into novels and so on. And then my wife said to me one day, you have a really good sense of humor. Your recent books don't really reflect that. You occasionally enjoy murder mysteries. Have you thought of writing a detective story, a crime novel with a little bit of a sense of humor? And I said, oh, let me give this a try. And so One for the Rock was the first effort, and then just last year came out Two for the Tablelands.
Got them located.
And yesterday or day before, I completed the first draft of the third one, which is due out this fall. So,
well, I'm so glad to hear that, and I really want to thank your wife for suggesting that. I'm such a fan of that type of literature, and I read the books, the two new ones, and Sebastian Sinard, is that the correct pronunciation?
in Newfoundland, people pronounce it Sinard,
Sinard.
which is a bit rougher, and I kind of goes with his personality.
Yeah, well, and I'm sure they call him Sebastian. Which he doesn't much care for his name, but I loved the humor in those books and the kind of wit. And I said to myself, man, this is the perfect ex-husband, this guy. He's like a walking I don't know, just things happen to him, and you'd never wish you were still with him, but you'd certainly enjoy still knowing him. I don't
Yeah,
know
yeah.
what you think of
He
that.
has, yeah, he has his faults, of course, and he, as people tend to do, they probably overlook their own faults and flaws and so on. But he's a kind of pretty neat character in a way, and I do share. My wife says I'm a lot like him. Well, we share
Hmm.
something. I'm happily married, and he's divorced, so that's one difference. But he has that kind of offbeat sense of humor, and he likes Scotch, which I do as well. And he has one son, I had two, so there are some similarities. So I was maybe in some measure, not totally, some measure drawing on my own life experiences.
But of course, I think that's something that to some degree all writers do. It slips in there. I mean, it's kind of your sensations of what you know or what you've lived through or what you've
Mm,
experienced. I don't know how that could ever be totally absent from writing.
mm,
Do you
yeah.
agree with me or
Oh,
yeah?
absolutely. I mean, you have to draw on what you know, or in case of historical novels, you're doing a lot of research. But again, you're still drawing on your knowledge of relationships and your own situation and your observance of the life around you. I see we have one
Absolutely.
person watching from Scotland. Hi, Kathy.
Oh, we do. I've got to, let me just see here. Oh, Kathy Gunn. Yeah, hi. If you have a question, Scotland, of course, Scotland would be tuning in.
That's right, for the Scotch vibe, right?
There you go. And I told you you weren't allowed to have any on this interview.
No,
You have to have it when you get off.
that's
Anyway,
right.
yeah,
Only water only.
there you go. And I left mine in the other room, so you're on your own. Kevin, having had such a long career, what have you seen, evolve? When you started out, you were not surrounded by all the authors that we see now in
Yeah.
Newfoundland. But what's your take on things?
And as it has evolved over the years.
Yeah,
Well, as you
yeah.
as you mentioned, I mean, when I started out, and the first book was published in 1978, there were, maybe you count the number of Newfoundland writers on one hand, and probably not use all the fingers at that. But things have just blossomed so much, as it is done in the other arts in Newfoundland: theater, music, all aspects of visual arts as well. So it's just really pleasant to see the profusion of writers, and taking the national stage as well as provincial stage. Obviously, people like Michael Crummy and Megan Coles, any number of writers have launched themselves and become really center stage in the Canadian writing scene, and worldwide too. So they've kind of subsumed me, I like to say, and I had my time in the sun, I like to think, and now other people are going into the forefront, and that's just, it makes for a really healthy writing community. And people growing up today don't think like I did when I started out, saying, how does a writer go about, is there such a thing as being a Newfoundlander and being able to publish a book? People don't think in those terms anymore, which is a real advantage, of course.
Well, we have some, very robust publishing houses here in Newfoundland, which is, for a
Absolutely.
small province, they're putting out
Yeah.
some wonderful books. And I know that firsthand because they're sharing them with me, and I'm getting to
Yeah.
interview a lot of the authors. When I conceived this show, I imagined, I'll have I don't know, half a dozen, maybe a dozen shows. Like this is
Mhm.
like over 50. And most of them, a large number of them, are Newfoundland authors,
Right. Yeah.
or roots leading back to Newfoundland. So it's pretty amazing, and there doesn't seem to be any end to it.
No. Well, it's a very fertile place to be writing about or setting your stories in. You know, I never wake up in the morning thinking, where will I set my next story? Because there's just so much territory I haven't uncovered as yet. And that was part of going back to this present series of mystery novels. My idea when developing it into a series was, well, Sebastian is, first of all, a tour guide. So this is going to allow me to take my audience to different parts of Newfoundland and Labrador in his function as a tour guide. You know, on the other level, he's a private investigator, so that helps as well. So I think in the course of the books, I'm going to take the audience to different parts of this province of Newfoundland and into Labrador, and you know, give them a taste. I think that's part of what I'm all about in these books is that I love this province so much, and it's so varied and so full of history and interesting people that let's explore different parts of it.
Yeah, well, yeah, it sounds wonderful.
Through the format of a murder to make it interesting.
Yeah, well, I'm glad that life is not truly that exciting here, but but it does lend itself to so much possibility, such as Sebastian launching himself over a cliff. I'll say no more. And of course, he survives.
Or walking the yes, you better survive. Or walking the tablelands and discovering somebody half buried in the rocks. Okay.
Yeah, I mean it's pretty amazing. So I can't wait to read those other books. I'm glad that the third one's on its way soon, and don't stop writing. It's just wonderful. Going back to delving into a little bit, you like your Scotch. I have not a clue about that, so I can't ask you anything intelligent, but I'm sure you could tell me lots. But you've also done some tour guiding, and in my delving around, I saw that you had been part of adventure tours, I think.
Adventure Canada.
Yeah. Canada, yeah. What was that
well,
about?
Adventure Canada is a Canadian company, and they do small boat tours. By small, I mean maybe 200 passengers. And do it in various parts of Canada and other places as well. They do, for example, a circumnavigation of Ireland. They go to the outer islands of Scotland. They sometimes go to Antarctica, but they're best known probably for their Arctic tours in Canada. But they also do a circumnavigation of Newfoundland. So they board the ship in St. John's with me aboard and several other resource staff, and take 10 days and go around the island, stopping each day at some particular point. You know, maybe somewhere in Trinity Bay, Lansom Meadows, obviously, Gros Morne, all the way around, hitting the highlights, but also some wilderness stops as well. And so you're seeing Newfoundland from the perspective of the ocean, which not everybody gets the chance to do. And so I go on, as I said, as a historian, because I've written the history of Newfoundland and Labrador, and talk to the passengers about the history of this place, take time to answer their questions, go ashore with them, and point out different features of the province. So it's a fun experience and fun with and able to be enjoyed with the other members of the resource staff, like a geologist, ornithologist, archaeologist, historian.
Wow. Well, that sounds amazing, and I'm assuming right now that they're probably not offering the cruises yet, but I hope that they do bring those back soon.
Yeah, they had to cancel the last 2 seasons, of course, because first of all, they're prohibited in going into Arctic waters, and it's just not feasible for cruise ships to operate now. But hopefully they'll be back next year. They certainly plan to be.
Yeah. Well, fingers crossed. And what a great place. What a great place for a murder. Just saying. Just saying.
Well, I have to say that's already been done, because Margaret Atwood had been on one of the trips, and she wrote a short story.
Oh well, but you haven't done it. Sebastian hasn't done it. Yeah. Kevin, what advice? I mean, part of what I like to include in this show is information for people who have maybe are out there longing to write a book or wishing to write a book, what kind of advice would you give to someone like that?
Well, if you're determined to do it, and I think it has to have a determination. I mean, this people say all the time, I think one day I'll write a book. And Margaret Lawrence had a great line. Somebody said to her, I think one day I'll write a book. And she said, I think one day I'll be a brain surgeon. So it means getting down to it and applying yourself to it. You may have other things. You got a day job, probably. But you find time to do it. You carve out a certain number of hours per day as best you can and start in and write. Take some time perhaps to develop the storyline that you're considering. Maybe even start out with some short stories and try to get them published, as a lot of writers do. But make that time, stick with it. And, I find if I write a page a day, before the end of the year, I have a manuscript. And then I can take time to rework that. So for example, I like getting up really early in the morning. By that I mean like 5 o'clock. And that's my best time to work, kind of, 5 to 8:30 or 9. The house is quiet, nobody around, and I can really concentrate. So find that time. I'm a morning person. By evening, I'm just too tired to be able to concentrate. So that doesn't work for me. But carve out the time, do it, get it done. It might take a couple of years, may take longer. And then you have something to work with, and then, see what publishers that might be interested in it. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and they are approachable. Last week I had Jerry Cranford on and with Flanker, and it's on their web pages, and they are always looking for new voices. So you have to ask.
Absolutely. There's always new people that on the scene. I'm amazed at the number of books that actually are published by, you're talking about specifically about Newfoundland publishers, each year. I mean, they run into the dozens. So there's certainly an interest out there. There's a market for it, and there's an interest on the part of publishers from hearing from new people.
Yeah, and actually your most recent books were published by Breakwater Books. Again, another fantastic, another fantastic publisher. When you were starting out, similar to kind of that situation we just talked about, was there anyone who influenced you or any experience you had that, that really helped you?
I think I can think of one particular incident that kind of stands out in my mind. When I graduated from high school, it was the same year that a Newfoundlander, his name was Harold Horwood, he's passed away now. He worked in government actually as well, but he wrote a book called Tomorrow Will Be Sunday. It was a novel set in Newfoundland that was published in New York. And I heard about it and I thought, wow, there's somebody here, living in the same province that I am, who's written a novel and is published by a Doubleday in New York. And I thought, wow, this is encouragement. And when I was in university, I think it was the second year I was there, Harold Horwood came and gave a public lecture, and I went to it. And from that, I got a lot of encouragement. There were other people writing at the time. I think people like Helen Porter, for example, one of our great writers from that earlier days. And these people became inspiration, I think, because they showed it could be done. And I think in the same way that they encourage me, I think I remember Michael Crummer saying, because I happened to be in a school in Labrador when Michael was in high school, and he was in the class unbeknownst to me. I didn't know about this till after the fact. And he said, Kevin, you show that it could be done. that you could be a writer. So that then I think, and I think people like Michael are encouraging other people now to show that it can be done.
Yeah, and that that moment in time, just when you can possibly make that comment, it can go a long way to encouraging someone, because as you said, it's a profession sometimes of rejection, and it
Yeah.
can, it can be.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, as I said, the first novel that I wrote was rejected. It was rejected by, half a dozen publishers. And in the end, I shelved it. I'm very glad I did, because it wasn't great. It wasn't great. But it was a step along the way, and I remember one of the publishers saying, we don't think this is worthy of publication, but we think you have some talent as a writer, so stick with it. And we love to see another book. So that was probably the encouragement I needed.
Well, we're so absolutely grateful that you did stick with it. And Kevin, we're just coming to the end of our time together, which is not nearly long enough. And I could stay here and talk to you forever. But for those of you who are watching, we are going to hop over on, actually on this same platform. We'll be on Facebook. And Kevin's going to do some reading, and we'll chat a little more about that after. And I just noticed Samantha Fitzpatrick asked, do you think Sebastian will ever venture off island into Labrador? So very quickly, Kevin, yes, no, who knows?
Yes, absolutely. At some point, absolutely.
That sounds positive, and thank you for Samantha for asking that. And so again, Kevin, thank you so much for the time today, and I think your words of inspiration for other authors and writers will be tremendous. And keep writing. Actually, I've got to just share this before we go and show people just some of your books there. And yeah, that's just a few. So Kevin, how about you get your reading hat on, and I'll meet you again in a few minutes.
Okay. Thanks so much. It's totally enjoyable.
Oh, thank you. And folks, again, if you would like to see more interviews from wonderful people like Kevin and Kevin's interview, it's going to be on my YouTube channel at Catherine Taylor TV. And thanks for joining us here on Let's Get Writing. Bye now.
Bye.